MKG Insights. Après la crise, comment se porte le secteur hôtelier? Présenté par Adrien Lanotte, Senior Analyst, MKG Consulting.
Bonjour à
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here this morning. We've heard brilliant analysis from Christophe Barrault and Loïs de Journal about the macro situation. We had the B2C update. I'd like to talk about hospitality now. What's the situation and what do our prospects look like? And then we'll talk about long-term strategy this afternoon. First topic, what's the current situation? If you take a look around worldwide, well, you heard earlier what the GDP trend was. Different sectors were hit by the COVID crisis in different ways. I won't say anything about China, because you can remember the situation last year. We were just emerging from a situation that Sébastien Maquin described as there was what was called the Golden Week in China, which had bumped China's levels back up to pre-COVID levels. And then we swung into the cycle throughout the first half of the year. In the U.S., there was a slight slump. China, which had an anticipated recovery, occupancy was just minus 10% and no more of a slump than that. That was the early part of the year. Now, in the last few weeks, the trends have been completely different. There's been a boom in Europe, or the beginnings of a boom in Europe, in macro and in the hospitality industry terms. The occupancy deficit is expressed in percentages here, in percentages, not points. This deficit has been absorbed. We only stand at about 1/4 of what it was. And conversely, look at that unexpected plummet in China. That was this past summer. Now, if you extrapolate through the last few weeks, it looks like things are resuming in China. China is in the process of reverting to normal levels. September, for us, is usually a very good month. -10 in the U.S. In 2019, it was 67% occupancy. In Europe, 80 at that time. So getting back to 80, we're not there yet. We all stand at about 60. But the recovery has been slower on the American continent than it has been here, and that's unsurprising because we were higher than they were back when. We'll come back to this afternoon. I won't dwell on this. Let me just say that we've had the same momentum when it comes to stock market valuations. Look at this graph. You can see the trends among the 12 biggest players worldwide. You look, Green Tea, the major Chinese players. In terms of financial and economic valuation, they experienced recovery far faster than the U.S. and we did, although we're back on track. We're getting back on track. In recent times, as I say, China and the U.S. have slumped. So much for the financial side. We'll come back to that this afternoon. Now let's look at the long-term trends. The fundamental, the driver here is the vaccination rate. You can see 44% of people who've been fully vaccinated. That's worldwide. Now in Europe, it's 67 to 88. 3/4 of the European population has been fully vaccinated, particularly in Italy, France, UK, and elsewhere. So the key hospitality countries. So Europe is pretty well vaccinated compared to China, and we're ahead of the US, which were leading a few months ago. Now the main countries of the trio have reached high levels of vaccination. These are the people who have yet to receive their second jab. But you can see Brazil, Turkey, Mexico, and India, and some developing countries that were running late, like Japan, are charted here. But there is a second wave that's going to buoy us along in vaccinations, a second wave of vaccinations that's going to buoy along the emerging countries, which will give us access or give renewed vigor to these older customers of ours who had dropped out of the picture, or these former customers. Now, let's look at the occupancy rate gap. It's narrowing down. Look at this comparison with the average of the last decade. The gap has closed. It's now 15 points. That's a recent figure. That was in Europe. Now, wait a minute, because Europe is a mixed bag, of course. So look at this graph. You can see the corridor, which is quite broad there between the best player and the laggard there. France is in the lead here. We're really catching up very swiftly. We are in a leading position in recovery in Europe because of our domestic clientele. Look at August. In France, it was minus 12, 13% when it comes to RevPAR, whereas the Czech Republic, which is highly dependent on the international clientele, they were still at only a third of their normal volume of business. Now, between the two, there are shades of difference. Look at this graph. One of the key factors was the mix of nationalities between European, domestic, and foreign, or non-European. So look at the best performers: France, Germany, the UK, and Poland. They pulled ahead when it came to the recovery of demand. Look at the recovery of, this is very, very recent, it happened over the summer. Look at the recovery of the Mediterranean countries in Southern Europe. This recovery being driven by the leisure clientele segment. Vacationers were lagging behind on the Benelux market. Hungary, Czech Republic are not faring so well. That's the case for Central and Eastern Europe generally. All the countries that are more highly dependent on non-European clients and some intra-European clients, they're still in a bit of a slump. So let's take a look now at the current situation. Of course, we're picking up from very low levels at the beginning of the year, so they look good. These trends look good. But August was a real turning point, particularly for markets that were experiencing great difficulties that are suddenly doing much better. Italy, Greece, Poland, and they have very different profiles. So it's, again, a mixed market. Europe versus non-Europe or the rest of the world, then inside Europe from one country to the next. Look at these differences. This is the trends in the RevPAR inside the same countries, segmenting hotels based on whether they're on the coast or inland, urban, rural, what have you, mountain. On the strong domestic markets, which is the case here in France, the recovery is underway. We performed better than pre-COVID along the coastline in France, whereas the inland market was still sluggish. And you can see regional contrasts that are quite staggering. You can see major differences between regions. This is the case in France, this is the case in Germany, the case in Spain. Look at Western Germany. There were areas that were still way, way down below their traditional RevPAR. Well, look, the North Coast suddenly started to pick up in Germany. That's quite clear. The German clientele flocked to the North Sea coast. And it's similar in Spain, where Madrid and Barcelona is still in a slump, and those regions that are less exposed to foreign, non-European customers did better, picked up. Galicia, for one. Now, what are the key factors that affect the recovery of demand? So the recovery itself and customers who suddenly want to spend money. Business customers are not so active at the moment. So this graph shows the monthly occupancy rate in Europe, and we've broken down that demand as a function of the clientele. So in blue, you have individual vacationers, leisure, and in yellow, business groups and corporate customers lumped together. So what do we see here? The recent recovery has been buoyed along by these individual vacationers, the leisure individuals. Let's take a look now at business individuals. They're not corporate, they're not attending a junket. Well, there was a slight pickup, but we're nowhere near previous levels. Question is when we will reach those previous levels. And then the big gap were the business groups, corporates, and groups of tourists. This graph shows traffic holdups in European cities. The bigger the traffic jam, the better for local business, for the local economy. So try to, change spectacles here and look at this through the spectacles of people who understand this dynamic. Look at the third week of September, where road traffic picked up. Okay, in Europe there was a backlog that needed to be released because there had been so little road haulage, but the bulk of these jams were made up of people who had resumed their commute to work. Last year in 2020 in Europe, we saw a bit of a recovery, but then there was a new plunge because there were closures. In North America, the trend remained very poor. People had left the cities, which are generally hubs of hotel activity. But look at New York, it's back on the rise. San Francisco, not so much, but the situation is improving slightly. How does this play out in the hotel industry? Here you've got occupancy rate curves for the 15 biggest cities when it comes to business activities, conferences, congresses, Vienna, Barcelona, Munich, these cities that host major conventions. The deficit was 70 in late May, which is usually peak season. It has been halved. And in those cities, it dropped to 35 last week. This is a positive indicator. The other good news is that we've crossed the 50% threshold, which is good news and very reassuring. Look at this projection. These are on the books. These are booked reservations as of yesterday. As of yesterday. This shows you planned occupancy rates through the end of this year in 4 cities: Brussels, Munich, Paris, and Lyons. in France. These are major corporate convention hubs. I see a big smile on Loic's face. Well, yeah, there's a big trade show coming up, Polytech. Not surprising that Lions should be chock-a-block with bookings. But this should be good news to you. This particular graph. Look at Munich and Brussels. There are pharmaceutical conventions scheduled. So our business clientele is back with us. And when it comes to leisure events like the World Judo Championships scheduled in Paris, in Munich, people are booking reservations for the Christmas market and the New Year's festivities. And then Halloween is a contributor as well. And another sign that there's been a change in the on-the-book occupancy. Look at these figures between September 15th and the 22nd. On average, we, day after day, this is bookings through the end of the year, 7 to 8 points of occupancy rate for the same cities. Paris, Munich, Lyons. Brussels is still down 4.5, but on the whole, positive trends. In Marseille, there was for Marseille, there's going to be a pickup in October, and then the cities hit by the COVID crisis are still going to be attracting the Christmas clientele. This slide shows the occupancy rate at the top and at the bottom, percentage of reservations breakdown, segmented as a function of when people made their reservation. Look at this. You can see that over the summer, early bookings, i.e. a month ahead of the stay, was even lower than in 2020. This increased recently. Conversely, there was a pickup in last-minute reservations. This is a week to 3 days before the stay. And then a boom in reservations within a month of the stay. This is not something that you can see in MIC in the business periods. As we saw, there were trade shows and so on. There's balance is being resumed. But what we can see clearly, and this goes back to what Loic has shown you, before the COVID crisis, 42% of the people who made reservations were doing so less than a month ahead. That late reservation trend is up 50%, and now 2/3 of all our clients are making reservations less than a month ahead of time. This is across the board in France this summer.
Encore en business.
This isn't something we find in the business sector, but it's a salient point. Now, the question is, have the habits changed? Maybe partly so. Will this continue? Yes, maybe partly so. And will this extend to the business clients? Yes, probably. So that's for the number of people. As for the prices, well, as Christophe said, there are some movements towards a better situation. Now, the big question is, are we going to change our price regime? When we're in a crisis situation, you have this curve profile where the average prices of prestigious hotels will go down. It all depends on international clients, and the budget will be slightly more resilient for domestic customers, tighter prices. So we have that profile, which is a reversed profile. When there's an expansion, it's the upscale hotels that increase the average prices and that lead the other ranges. Now, the real question is, when will we have this point of inflection in terms of prices? Well, it will depend on all kinds of factors. It's difficult to say when it will occur. And we believe that, considering what we've observed this year in 2021, especially this summer, we believe that it'll be in the summer in 2022, because as we've observed, in the summer of 2021, the prices went up if we look globally in the country, and that is the inflection point. Now, what does that mean in terms of forecasts? Well, as Christophe said, it is extremely complex to announce figures today. Today, we're working on different scenarios, low or high. There were drops in June, some significant drops. The lowest points were very low. We had -32, -33 in France. And if on the reverse, if we look at the economy, we could be positive and say that we are in cycles where the growth, inflation would be such that we could have a solid ground. But I had to look at my crystal ball, and our medium scenario is the one on which we're working with this inflection during 2022. And in France, in 2022, we anticipate a fallback compared to 2029 of 8% of the RevPAR. In the first half, we'll be at -14. So it's not the same movement at the beginning of the year, in the summer, and at the end. It will differ in all the European markets. There'll be a two-digit drop in Europe and -14, -15 compared to 2019 in Paris. So where does this place us? Well, it is as if we were going back to 2014, where we have business levels. We anticipate certain business levels that will be at those lowest points that we had then. We'll talk about how we can deliver growth from an operational point of view and strategic point of view this afternoon, and I'd like to thank you all. Now, what I suggest, because as we've seen, the scenario depend on all kinds of risks. We talk about the health situation, and we're going to talk about something else now, another risk, which is the cyber digital risk.